Have you ever felt like everyone else knows what they're doing except for you, and you're just there pretending to be successful, pretending to be qualified, and pretending to belong? And maybe you're starting a business or moving into a leadership role or building a career, pursuing a big goal, and despite all of your accomplishments, there's still this nagging fear that one day someone is going to discover that you're a fraud. And meanwhile, everyone else just feels so legitimate. The doctor seems like a doctor, the CEO seems like a CEO, and the expert seems like an expert, and you feel like an imposter just trying not to get found out. But what if the entire premise behind how we understand imposter syndrome is wrong? And what if the reason why you feel like an imposter isn't because you lack confidence in your abilities, but because you're aware of something that most people have tuned out from? And in this video, I'm going to reveal to you how everyone has imposter syndrome and how it comes just as a natural consequence of living in a human society, and how you can use this understanding to free yourself from the anxiety and self-doubt that comes from trying to feel legitimate. Now, a quick caveat that I would mention here is that imposter syndrome is a multifaceted problem. And so this is going to be one facet of working through imposter syndrome. And I'm going to create more videos about imposter syndrome in the future that address imposter syndrome from different angles. But in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you a perspective shift that you can apply to the issue of imposter syndrome that'll serve as the necessary foundation for letting go of the anxiety and the doubt that comes along with imposter syndrome. And this perspective shift is that everyone has imposter syndrome because on some level, everyone knows that they are an imposter. And that doesn't mean that expertise isn't real. What I mean by that is that we all have to step into a constructed social role in order to play a part in human society. And so there is nothing about a lawyer that's essentially a lawyer, and there's nothing about a doctor that's essentially a doctor. They were all just born as people, and eventually they decided to step into that role. And despite their relative expertise in any given field, there had to be a conscious decision to put on that persona. And deep down, the reason why you feel like an imposter is because you recognize that you consciously and deliberately stepped into that societal mask, whereas everybody else in your field just seems like they are essentially part of that field. For example, if you are a new doctor, you know that you had to go through a big long process in order to step into the role of being a doctor. So even if you know that you have tons of expertise, there's still going to be a feeling of imposter syndrome because you know that you're stepping into a constructed role, while looking at others in your same field might feel like they simply are that role and have some intrinsic authority to be in that role. And the issue is that we know our own humanity too well. So you've been with yourself all the way through your life. You've seen your doubts, your insecurities, your embarrassments, all of the different shortcomings that you've had over the years. And you've seen yourself as a 5-year-old in a sandbox, and you've seen yourself just lounging out in front of the TV being a couch potato. But everyone else just gets viewed through their role. The doctor looks like a doctor, the CEO looks like a CEO, the professor looks like a professor. And you know that you're just the man behind the curtain because you've known yourself your whole entire life. But everyone else seems like such a Wizard of Oz, just sitting on the throne of the Emerald City. And in order to understand fully the constructed nature of the roles that we play in society, we have to also understand that human society is essentially nothing more than a collection of games. And to be a fully engaged member of human society is to engage in games of pretend and make-believe, and to put on masks and play roles within the larger game of human society. And oftentimes people will think about games as just things that we do for fun, like we think about hopscotch and like tic-tac-toe and Jenga. But if we really think about the essential nature of what a game is essentially a game is a bunch of rules and objectives that human beings project onto reality. And so in the same way that hopscotch has rules and objectives that we project onto reality, the same thing is true with money and jobs and institutions. And even though the expertise is very real within these games, and the outputs and the work that's done is very real within these games, they are all still games. And so if somebody is a teacher, they're putting on the mask or the role of being a teacher in order to engage in the game of educating students. And there's certain rules for how to do that, and there are certain desired outcomes, and there's ways to win and lose that game. Or if someone's a CEO of a tech company and there's a certain type of technology that they're producing and distributing, the producing and distributing of the technology, that's the objective of the game, and then there are certain rules and procedures and winning moves and losing moves for bringing that about. And so games are more than just child's play, they're actually how we get along in society. society. And so human society is one giant game of make-believe. And it's the fact that we are able to project these games onto reality and play pretend that enables us to create so many amazing things. And a necessary component to playing these games is playing pretend. And it's a really deep human instinct of ours to play pretend and to engage in imagination. And we can tend to see games as something that's childish and not very serious. But what that misses is the fact that when children are playing games, they're actually training for their adulthood role. So for example, like how lion cubs might tossle around with their brothers and sisters to learn how to hunt later on in adulthood, what we're doing as children is we're playing make-believe. We're playing like we're princesses and pirates and things like that because we are practicing putting on a persona role for playing all of the different games that adulthood requires of us. But the difference is that children are very aware that they're playing pretend, but we as adults forget that we're playing pretend. But imposter syndrome, that's what happens when we start to remember and we start to get this little inkling that we are actually playing pretend. And so when a child pretends to be an astronaut, they know that they're pretending, but when an adult pretends to be an astronaut and that's what they do for a living, then they really genuinely believe it, but then they might have their little doubts in the back of their mind. And that's essentially where imposter syndrome comes from, where we start to become conscious of the fact that we're playing pretend. And because we were mistaken about where imposter syndrome comes from, we start trying to convince ourselves that we're more legitimate and like, oh, I'm not an imposter at all. I have this expertise. But what ends up happening is that we're actually denying a deep truth to ourselves when we say that we're not actually imposters. And counterintuitively, in order to really shake the doubt that comes with imposter syndrome, a big part of that is recognizing that, oh yeah, I am playing a role here. I am not actually a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or whatever my profession would be. Doesn't mean I don't have the expertise. The expertise is real, but the authority, the inherent authority just isn't there. But likewise, the institution that I work for and the other people that work for that institution, they're all playing a game of pretend as well. So if you struggle with imposter syndrome, it's important to realize that while your expertise is real, your social role will always be a figment of your imagination, but also a figment of the collective imagination of human beings, which is the foundation upon which our entire society operates. And that's not a bug, that's a feature. Now, if all of this is resonating with you so far and you want to learn how to overcome procrastination and self-sabotage or any other pattern where you're holding yourself back from your full potential, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Realize Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself. And the link is down below in the description box. I also have a link to an application down below if you are interested in working with me. Now, there's a very popular story that has a lot to do with imposter syndrome, and that story is the story of the Wizard of Oz. And the book has a certain way of approaching it, but I particularly like the movie's way of approaching it. And the Wizard in the Wizard of Oz represents the authority roles that people can step into within society and the kind of illusion that that spins when somebody else steps into an authoritative role. And so in this story, the Wizard of Oz is known as Oz the Great and Powerful, this magical wizard. And whenever the main characters go in to confront the Wizard of Oz, he has this big green floating head and he seems to have such gravitas and so much authority to him. And in this form, the Wizard of Oz represents the authority that we tend to project onto other people and project onto authority figures. And when we step into a societal role, we are likewise stepping into the role of the wizard. And that's true whether you're a doctor or a business owner or a cashier at Walmart. And people project a lot of power onto the Wizard of Oz. He's called Oz the Great and Powerful. And he really leans into the mystique of that, trying to live up to the standards of being Oz the Great and Powerful. And then towards the end of the movie, a curtain gets pulled back and he's found out to just be this average guy behind the curtain. And he says, oh, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And this symbolically represents how every single authority figure that exists is always just the man behind the curtain. No matter how much authority they seem to possess, there's always just an everyday average human being behind it. But the wizard is also a very important character. Even though he is a fraud, even though he's an imposter and a trickster, there's some very positive roles that he plays within the story. So in the movie, the very first place that you see the wizard is actually in real life, because when Dorothy goes into her vision and she sees the Wizard of Oz, it it's actually the same person that she saw earlier in the movie in real life, where it was this snake oil salesman guy who was pretending to be this psychic, and he was like traveling around. And Dorothy was running away from home, and she runs into this snake oil salesman guy that eventually plays the wizard, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to tell your future." And what he does is he does this trick where he takes a photo that Dorothy has in her bag of her Aunt Em, and he starts saying, "Oh, Aunt Em, I see her in my crystal ball, and as she's suffering, she's like clutching her chest, and she's so distraught that you're missing." And then what happens is that Dorothy gets scared, and then she decides not to run away after all, and she goes home, and she makes it essentially just in time to survive a tornado. And so this is the moral gray area of the wizard and of the authority position. So you can use an authority position to trick, and you are inherently an imposter. So the wizard, or this snake oil salesman, he's not really able to tell the future. He's playing a trick. But in this case, he's acting as the imposter for a very good cause. He is causing Dorothy to realize that she doesn't really want to run away after all. And in that, he's using his false position of power to help her realize her real, true sovereign wants, which is to be at home with her family. And so in this way, when we're the imposter and we fully step into that authoritative role, knowing that we are playing a trick and that we aren't really essentially whatever it is that we're pretending to be, we can use our fake power to help people realize their real power, their real, true sovereignty. And this requires us to know that we're playing a trick. This requires us to know that we're an imposter. And so instead of trying to overcome imposter syndrome, we have to go, yes, I am the imposter. I am the imposter that serves and empowers other people. And then later on in the story, we see him and he gets revealed as the imposter, as just the man behind the curtain, just an average, ordinary guy with no magical powers whatsoever. And yet he bestows the protagonist with what it is that they need to actually realize their own power. And so the Scarecrow, who in the book is always coming up with all of the brilliant plans, believes that he doesn't have a brain. But then when the wizard gives him an honorary diploma, he suddenly feels like he has a brain, and he's like, oh, I am smart. And so in that way, the wizard actually empowers the Scarecrow. And the Tin Man, who in the book is the most sentimental character of all, the most caring, the most feeling. But the Tin Man believes that he has no heart. And so what the wizard gives him is a clock heart, a clock in the shape of a heart, just a trinket, and says, here, this is because you have a great heart. And then the Tin Man starts to believe that about himself, starts to see that he is actually a very caring, feeling, sentimental guy. And then in the book, the lion is the bravest of all, the one that is always being courageous and overcoming fear, who believes that he is a coward. And then the wizard gives him a medal of honor for courage and bravery, just a trinket. And yet, this has the intended effect of helping the lion discover that he is truly courageous after all. And so everything about the power of the wizard is fraudulent. It's totally made up. But by stepping into that imposter role, he's able to actually genuinely empower other people. And so that's a huge part of the value of realizing that you're the imposter and truly leaning into it. And so the wizard has a lot to do with your ability to step into the role of being the powerful person who operates through a role in society. But then if we look at the main protagonist, Dorothy, she represents a different kind of power, and you will also need this in order to shake imposter syndrome. And one of the things that's important to note about Dorothy is that she's a naive character. So she's not somebody who we would see as like a really strong external authority figure. And yet one of the things that Dorothy has going for her the whole entire time is that she is willing to stand up to supposed authority figures when those authority figures are doing the wrong thing. And so Dorothy represents the capacity to see past the imaginary games that we play and to see into the realities that the wizard is just the man behind the curtain. And there are many instances within the movie where she has to push back on seemingly official authoritative things. Like in the beginning of the movie when Elmira Gulch, a very, very powerful woman, goes to a judge to get Toto, her dog, ordered to be euthanized. And so Dorothy is able to push back on that because she sees it as wrong. She sees past past the illusion of authority in this very powerful, rich woman and also in the judge that orders her dog to be euthanized. And so she decides to run away with Toto. And Toto tends to represent Dorothy's intuition. And so the entire movie is an all-out assault on Dorothy's intuition and on her ability to actually see things for what they are. And all throughout the movie, Toto keeps getting taken away from her by different authority figures and keeps coming back to her. And it's like everybody's always seeing her as this naive girl, and yet she is able to just see through the power of the wizard, and she's able to stand up for herself. And so in this way, Dorothy acts a lot like the child in The Emperor's New Clothes. So in the story of The Emperor's New Clothes, the emperor is tricked into believing in the false authority of some charlatans who agree to make him these wonderful, beautiful clothes. But they don't create any clothes at all. They just pretend to make him clothes. And the emperor is actually naked. And so the emperor himself, despite being an authority figure, falls for the false authority of these charlatans, and he truly believes that he's wearing these garments. And then everyone sees the emperor as a kind of Wizard of Oz in himself, sees him as unfallible, sees him as somehow possessing some kind of inherent authority. And so when he goes out into the town square totally naked, all of the peasants that are there taking him in go, okay, well, that's the emperor, so he must know something that I don't. So if he's saying that he's wearing these magnificent clothes, my eyes must be lying to me. I must be wrong. But then there's a child in the crowd, and the child just points out, hey, the emperor is naked. And that's because the child can look at the emperor with a beginner's mind. The child doesn't see all of the power structures that the adults are acclimated to. Again, the child knows when there's a game of pretend going on, while the adults fall for the pretend. And so when you're struggling with imposter syndrome, it's really important for you to be able to see through the illusion of power, to view authority figures and other people around you that might seem like they have more going for them or that they have more inherent authority, to be able to see them like Dorothy sees the wizard, or like the child in The Emperor's New Clothes sees the emperor. And that's to be able to call out the fact that all external expressions of authority are inherently contrived and pretended. And so what you can learn from the wizard is to fully embrace your role as the imposter and to be the best imposter that you can possibly be, and to use your imposter status to fully serve and empower other people. And what you can learn from Dorothy is the capacity to see through the illusion of other people's apparent authorities and to recognize that they are imposters too. And both of these skill sets are necessary to shake the doubt and insecurity that comes along with imposter syndrome. So in order to apply this perspective shift practically, stop trying to see yourself as more legitimate. Instead, embrace the fact that you are the imposter and that that's a feature and not a bug. And even the people that you admire who are in huge positions of power didn't somehow become a real authority. Instead, they became comfortable with embodying that role. And imposter syndrome doesn't mean that something is going wrong. In fact, it's very likely that you're simply seeing through the game. But the problem is that you're only seeing through the game when it comes to recognizing your own imposter nature. You're just not recognizing that the whole society and the people within that society are all playing a game of pretend of their own. And recognize and embrace the fact that you are playing a game, and step into your role as the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, while also recognizing that you will never not be the man behind the curtain. And if you'd like to learn about how to connect to your real power, your true sovereignty, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.